The power of Christ is my shepherd. I shall not want. The power of Christ maketh me to lie down in green pastures. The power of Christ maketh me to lie beside still waters. The power of Christ restoreth my soul. The power of Christ leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for its name's sake. Yea, though Benton walks through the valley of the shadow of death. The power of Christ cannot fear. And that power is with Benton. Its rod and its staff, they comfort him. The power of Christ prepareth a table before Benton in the presence of their enemies. The power of Christ anointeth Benton's head with oil. Benton's cup runneth over. Most certainly goodness and mercy shall continue to follow Benton all the days of this slow process of death. For Benton always abides in the house of the most super intelligent power, source, and force of love and creation at the highest levels of vibrational frequency. Always and forever. Strong delusion, folks. Strong delusion. And I don't mean Psalm 23. So uncovering and walking the perfected path that lies within. And then praying, right? P-R-A-Y, right? Well, this realm teaches P-R-E-Y, whether actively or passively. Predation, P-R-E-Y. And what is the Christian child taught? Well, make sure to say those prayers. Now, usually at nighttime, right? Whereas Benton, more of a morning, first thing in the morning, prayer, P-R-A-Y-E-R. It's very predatory out here, is it not? Mm-hmm. Still here. Some of the egg residue. Figure out some way to filter that out without filtering out the goodness of the health drink. Mm-hmm. Oh well. The royal we is on a 34-hour restart. That's interesting. We'll get into that. The bloom's off the rose with me in the company, I think, which is, it's all for the best, right? One day, perhaps Benton will be able to enter into such situations without gilding the lily. Is that the proper expression? For in order to attempt to attract truck drivers, the company uses the framework of family, right? Join the family, you know, however that's phrased. I don't want to get too specific, but however that's phrased, right? Whatever phraseology is used for family. And if that works, I think it works because a lot of these truckers, it's all about a family, you know, back home somewhere. We have some notes. Where are the notes? But then look at truck driving more and more, in my view, as economics. You know, this idea of the general public waking up and people figuring things out. Well, to me, that's a lot of that has to do with resignation and acceptance of, you know, something like, where is it? Thought I wrote this down. Oh yeah, truck driving as basic housing, you know. It's also interesting that apparently I get paid for the 34-hour restart. I mean, that's my understanding, unless I'm wrong or misinterpreted the fine print or the legalese. Now, I wouldn't be too surprised if they considered this not to be work, but my understanding is that if I'm on the road uh, and ready to work, that I'll get paid. I'm not sure I care either way. I know that sounds crazy, but this idea of a $1,800 a week guarantee, which again, you're always going to have an asterisk, but um, and then the normie notion of how expensive everything is. Life is cheap, folks. Life, what's considered to be life, right? The slow process of death, that's cheap. Born with that, if that's even possible. Born into a slow process of death. And then, what I tried to hit on before immediately shifting topics, right? The crossover. He juked one way and went the other way, but now he's forgotten it. He's dribbled the ball out of bounds, apparently. Oh well, many different directions to go. I still want to talk about being on the 34. What was I going to say? Truck driving is basic housing. Yeah, that's where Benton's at. Hey, can I eat some food? Can I buy some supplements? Right? Can I do this, that, and the third to maintain? Right? Oh, strong delusion. I think that's what I wanted to talk about. The strength. Oh, the uncovering of the path within, perfected path that lies within, but then the realm balancing that with how strong the delusion is. The perfected path juxtaposed with how strong the delusion is. I'm going to write that down. Strength of delusion. And I mean the realm itself, not the delusional states of an individual, right? And so to realize that, lashing out at the dispatcher, that's in the notes. Well, what causes that? And is that even, strictly speaking, inappropriate? I would say it's not inappropriate. If anything was inappropriate, it was the gilding of the lily and this game of, I'm going to pretend to be affable, but I am. That's the thing, is Benton has affable aspects of his personality. That in no way precludes Benton from becoming a complete and total asshole, right? Working for a bunch of crooks, because it's not possible to have a trucking company that's not owned and operated by a bunch of crooks. This is not possible, right? Not in the longer term. In the short term, anybody can go bankrupt or go belly up in truck driving. Then also, I'm starting to see these news items, these news stories about luxury items and assets as write-offs, right? Nice. Yeah. Bulk Hungry says the delusion, absolution of mental confusion. What's up, man? Yeah. Yeah. Most definitely. I like that. And yeah. At what point will this reflexive, almost obsessive need of mine to sort of fit in, not even fit in, just to sort of go along with whatever bullshit is on offer. Meanwhile, I got the job by just being a straight shooter, right? Straight shooting, and sold myself a little bit, but just basically told the guy how it was and was like, look, somebody's going to hire me. Which, what I mean, he knows what I mean is that, well, I'm talking to somebody who runs a 1099 outfit out of Chicago. So yeah, somebody in Chicago is going to hire me on a 1099. Is it going to be you? Right. And now here I am in an unair conditioned truck getting bit by skeeters because for some reason I failed to buy, even though I thought about it when I was at Walmart, I cheaped out and failed to buy bug spray because it's like, yeah, but it's almost not time to get bitten by mosquitoes. Well, who cares? It's $5. Buy the fucking, what's it? When the money doesn't have a value, this idea that how expensive things have gotten and inflation, that means the money has what's best to do with the money, spend the money. I know that's counterintuitive because, I think part of humanity or the human condition is to, like the Depression era mindset, is to try to hoard the money. But it's actually, that's why we're seeing these luxury items as write-offs. It's like, yeah, go buy a private jet, because now apparently the changes to the tax code, businesses are able to write that off, the 100% of the value in the first year, which means go pay cash or borrow enough money to buy the private jet. See, while simultaneously people's food stamps are cut off. So I understand the part where I read the YouTube comments, and yeah, a lot of it's bots. So I understand the part where I read YouTube comments and it's like, well, these people could get jobs. It's like, yeah. And business people could wait 20 years and grow their businesses to a level where now they can justify and actually afford a private jet. Or them and three of their buddies, like more historically has happened, they could sort of just go in together. But then, partnership is the only ship that doesn't float, according to Dave Ramsey. So it's like, do I really want to? Does the successful business person really want to get into some kind of deal with three other business people on a private jet? Probably not. See, so while the lady, the welfare queen next door, meanwhile, what has gone wrong in the individual's life that there's a welfare queen or king living next door? We was welfare kings, right? Why is there one of those living next door and across the street? Number one, here's your sign that maybe things haven't gone exactly as promised during their slow process of death. I'm going to try to get out of this you vernacular, lecturing the audience. That's crazy. They, right, whoever these, and not living across the street from you, right, living next door to the person who would complain about food stamps, because I've ran off everybody that would complain about. I've effectively ran everybody off who would have a problem with individual humans getting food stamps, or maybe I've convinced them to some extent. So while simultaneously the government is like, okay, well, no food stamps this month, but hey, free private jets because it's a write-off on the taxes if the business can show certain losses on paper, right, which may or may not be losses. And then in a part of the economic cycle where that's more likely to occur, right, because it's all within the framework of a boom bust, boom bust, boom bust. See, and that's partially what it means to maintain society within a state of collapse. So if the overarching system of things represents a collapse and people are like, wow, this is not sustainable. What do you mean it's not sustainable? But yet it continues on. And it was happening when I got here in 75, and it continues 2025. And if I'm still here in 2050, it'll still be going on. So what do you mean? Huh? I'm confused. Oh, this is mind control. This is the propaganda of the system itself saying, well, this is not sustainable. Well, who benefits and on what basis if the populace looks around at what's happening and says this is clearly not sustainable? Well, number one, for whom? Number two, on what basis? And number three, what motivations do you mean? Because it's how is it not sustainable for the rich and the wealthy, the actual wealthy people who have access to private jets? Who, as a business decision, would not buy one, right? They won't buy it because, it can't be justified at a level of accounting. Well, now it can. You can write off 100% of the value against losses, right? And then the same article that I read about the private jets talked about because that's how they hook you in is, oh, well, private jet gets your attention. But then the articles about how for years now people have been buying car washes and other businesses that involve specialized equipment, whatever that's supposed to mean. And now we're into legalese, and now it comes down to how much can a tax attorney and forensics accountants be paid, to put their professional reputation on the line and say, well, no, this is above board and proper, right? Just like Enron appealed to the government way back in the day, and they got somebody. First the government said no to market accounting, and then eventually somebody at the government said, well, yeah, this is fine, completely fine, and signed off on it. And then that allowed Enron, which was the prototype or the test case for. So if people are confused as to, well, what's up with, the Dow Jones, it's all-time highs, and it crashes, but then it's right back to all-time highs. Yeah, it's because it's all a bunch of Enrons. And people think, oh, Enron, this was some sort of anomaly. People went to prison. It was a test case. It was the prototype for the new way of doing things. See, it's like now we've found a new way under the legalese. Found a new way under the legalese. One nation under legalese. Right, legalese. One of the gods. Legalese. But yeah, car washes apparently, maybe probably laundromats. And if you look at these businesses, it really doesn't make sense. They built a brand new one in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and the area they put it in, you're just like, yeah, there's a lot of traffic here, but it wasn't that. It's just the actual area is clearly falling into decay, right? Clearly. And so it's like, who would break off? I don't know, what's it cost to buy a piece of property? The land, the dirt's probably $400,000, I'm guessing. $350 to $400,000, and then it's got to be close to $1 million to put in that car wash, right? 700. Let's just say they could 750,000. I guess we've woke up whoever next door. That never happens. Probably should have turned the engine on. Of course, their engine's running, so that's kind of on them. If you ask me, if I woke them up, my loud ass voice. I say go for the earplugs. That's my opinion. That's what I do if I really feel like I need to make sure I get proper sleep. Parked out of Love's in the Houston area. Not in Houston proper, but and I'll get to the truck driving stories, but I don't know. We lost half the audience with the economic talk because people don't want to hear it. And shout out to Millennial Steam. And the problem is some of his philosophically, I know some of what he's talking about. I know from experience he's in error, right? With some of what I don't know that he knows or cares. But I've talked about before, correct philosophy is the absence of incorrect philosophy. But I don't think he understands that. He hasn't detected the errors in those philosophies. If maybe he will, maybe he won't. But that's one of Benton's gifts, is to be able to detect these errors in philosophy. It's one of my gifts. But yeah, I think let me see if I can find this video. Well, I know I can. It's in my history. Just watched it. It's called, America Runs on Denial, Not Duncan. The Illusion of the Middle Class. ILL, illusion. It's right there. It's an illusion. Ill. Right. Now I already forgot why I brought this up. But yeah, it's there on the post tab if anybody wants to check it out. Good stuff overall. If one can avoid the fear, right? If one can avoid the fear. And then, what are people looking for? When they pop onto this stream and it goes from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, right? But then back to 3, back to 2, right? Like, what are they seeking? And does it matter? Right. And then Benton, the more Benton divorces himself from giving them whatever he thinks they're seeking, right? Because number one is, what does Benton need out of this, or what is Benton attempting to accomplish? That's got to be number one, of course. And then for whoever's popping into the stream, number one has to be, what are they trying to get out of it? Presumably, what are they trying to get? And that's fair. It's fine. I do know, and again, my apologies, I've forgotten why I brought up millennial steam, but he hit on some key points. Oh, yes, the looking away. Oh, wait a minute. We're getting comments. Yeah, somebody waiting to see me get emotional and misidentify. Yeah, and that's the thing is, I like the improper identification, proper versus improper identification, because that's my own, that's my own phraseology and throwing down of the gauntlet, while understanding, here's the spiritual warrior side of it, is to know that the moment the being commits to and puts their name on such a concept, that many individuals will then observe over time and seek to denigrate, or again, mockery and ridicule, and to say, well, look here, there he is, he says the one thing, but then look at how he's behaving, right? And then back to a point I didn't quite make earlier, the emotionalism itself is not necessarily the improper identification. It's that in an emotionally charged state, there is a possibility, a greater possibility of incorrect speech or action, right? Although I would say that effect is somewhat mitigated. And in fact, looking back at getting hired at this trucking company, in fact, the improper identification is, say, how I got introduced to this dispatcher, and then how I interacted with the dispatcher, in reality, not keeping it all the way real because of the fake, phony aspects of personality, right? And then, indoctrination into Jehovah's Witnesses, something I never joined. I have a Jehovah's Witness story, actually. I need to make a note of that. I have a lot of things that happen that I never think of on stream to tell folks. A Roswell Walmart parking lot story. And then again, the emotionalism and the brief improper identification is dead. Well, see, these are the lovers of death. So, of course, there would be lovers of death coming here to affirm what Benton symbolizes. Oh, well, look at it. Look at that symbol of power, creation, authority. Look at it temporarily affirming death, right? I mean, that's really ultimately what we're talking about. The affirmers and lovers of death, affirmers of death, affirmers and lovers of death, right? But then they occupy a moral low ground where, they're only ever going to be potentially rewarded for their loving of death, and certainly not punished, right? Nice. Paper rolls to, yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, and that's the most widely distributed periodicals in the world, right? Yeah. Yeah, bulk hungry fellow truck driver, or maybe former truck driver by now. Yeah, the headquarters. I've toured the headquarters as a youth, but it's interesting how that works, and fully part of the system. But I do like the point of the people who come here wanting to see a particular type of thing that is on the whole a negative motivation, or just is negative. and the glee and to participate in that, while also, because I'm now somewhat observing the so-called truth community panel verse personality politics, that I do have chose to expose myself to for an extended period of time. And, part of my brain can sort of fill in the gaps of whatever may have occurred while I was gone. Not that I'm back, but in ways never left, because, society, LOL, the being cannot separate themselves from society. And if the so-called truth community panel verse represents a society in a way, well, that would still be going on in my mind, right? Via imagination. See how it works? So it's not possible to remove oneself from society. And so I hear things said in certain type of ways, and I know that it's because of something I said on the live stream. Now, is it AI? Are people, transcribing the streams and then having AI pull out the key points, right? There's ways to do this without listening live or listening to replays. It would be easily accessible, right? But when you have someone such as myself who's pushing ideas forward over time via a progression, well, that represents arbitrage opportunities in the context of a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions. Those are arbitrage opportunities, right? Arbitrage opportunities. And within the context of the vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, whereby each individual in many, many ways is, they're defining themselves in such a way as to involve themselves with capitalism and business transacting, whether they want to or not, whether they view themselves that way or not. And an example is one of my favorite true crime channels that I found when it was, maybe 1,000 subscribers, and it blew up to like 60,000. And it's because, the content creator finds these new cases and does a bunch of research, and then he goes and pays whatever money to get the interrogation footage. But then, of course, what happens is, because his channel is a business, and because other true crime channels are a business, he's figured out that, oh, he's actually doing research for these bigger channels, because they just watch his channel. And then when they see, oh, we can do a video and it'll blow up bigger than the original video, right? That's called the arbitrage. And when the small creator is a business and the larger creator is a business, the big money always gets the little money in poker or in financial markets. That's just how it works. The big money gets the little money. Meanwhile, YouTube is something of a meritocracy in a way, because the small channel just gets whatever views they get, right? It's not, oh, the big channel took their views. No, YouTube's never going to push that small channel out beyond a certain level anyway. That's why it's a small channel, right? Because how did it go from 1K to 60K, but then it'll continue to slowly grow, but how did it blow up? Because YouTube pushed it out. So when people talk about shadow banning, that's inverse. There's no such thing as shadow banning. The channel and the content either gets pushed out perpetually or it doesn't. And that's based on an ever-changing, evolving, growing, zombie business, right? Animated death warmed over, the algorithm, the almighty algorithm, suiting its own purposes and suiting the system's purposes, right? So there's no shadow, nothing's held back on YouTube. It's what is pushed forward. And whatever is not pushed forward will seemingly be held back. Well, it's not held back. It's just not pushed forward. And I'm seeing more and more what's actual content at a human level is channels like mine and channels like El Delgado and truck driving. And this is effectively no views. And even, the 250 max views that YouTube's ever going to let be shown on one of my live streams, Well, that's not even happening anymore. But who cares? What's it matter? Like, what's the difference? And the better Benton's performance is at managing his emotions, right, and not lashing out, and not performing conflict content, internal conflicts, right, so really a lot of what we're talking about with the emotionalism is it's the resolution or the reconciliation of internal conflict, right, and doing that through an external means in part, right. It's a process. Again, that's within the slow process of death, contending with the dead flesh, right, the zombie, contending with the dead flesh zombie. That, again, this notion that what Benton is could ever be individuated and encased and trapped within, a dead, animated death warmed over, dead flesh, right. That's once it reaches a certain level of growth, then the decay begins, right. And this is the case for all of us individually. So all of us individually. And so now we're back to the problems incumbent and inherent and built into the English language. See, even the pronouns and the phraseology is not set up to support even the being pointed in the proper direction, right? Internally, inwardly, right? Inwardly, because as soon as I think inwardly, now I'm going to think inward, in dash word. Now, could that ever be a coincidence? Right. And then it's right there. This system that has a sense of humor and never stops mocking says nigger. Right. Because it says, hey, go ahead and always point inwardly as much as possible. Because then this place will treat you like an N-word, nigger. Not you, the listener. See, I'm doing it again. Benton is treated that way. And again, this is a lot of the Christ story, is to choose to accept and expect to be greeted as a nigger. So the reality of truck driving and living, more and more people are going to figure out, oh, we can go live in a big rig and feed ourselves, right? And subsist at a basic level. But while those people will still have, being deluded within themselves, they'll still have a notion of, well, maybe we can save and maybe we can become owner operators and maybe this and maybe that. No, there's no future in any of that, right? So it's, for whatever reason, the system has to give me a certain amount of money. But the fact is, I would do the job for far less money, but I would not, I would make demands that the industry's not willing to tolerate. It's like, yeah, at this point, I would rather, once I save up some small amount of money, relatively small amount of money, beyond that, I'll happily do this job for enough money to pay for my basic needs, which is including, we're at about $30 a day for food and supplements, right? Which is not a lot of money. It's $900 a month. I can't read that comment right now, or I'll get in my own way, but thank you for contributing. I saw the comment come in. Starting to get into the flow here. Starting to. So, to keep it all the way real would be to talk to the company as if I know and they know that I'm the nigger. Not, and again, that's a violation. See, that Benton is performing as a nigger, and I don't mean black person, right? Coolie, you know, a temporarily indentured servant, basically to be a temporary indentured servant, right? Actively evading taxes, right? And then will the government imprison Benton over that? Don't know. We're going to find out. Not paying the taxes. Not going to pay the taxes. Still paying some taxes, sales taxes and whatever. But gasoline when I had it. I don't have a car now, but at what point is the markets and the economics slowed down to the point where, again, if you want to talk about specialized equipment and it can be written off in the first year, 100% of the specialized equipment, well, then at what point is some sort of tax attorney willing to sign off on, oh yeah, that can be a tractor, right? That can be a class 8 heavy duty tractor. Sure. We'll call that special. We'll just make sure that it comes with certain bells and whistles, right? Because wouldn't they want to buy the more expensive model at that point if it's a write-off? We'll just make sure it comes with, something that isn't really needed, but, can plausibly be claimed to be needed, right? And this game's been going on my whole life. It changes forms, right? This is what the rich folks do. Not to become wealthy. This is just part of being in that club. And a lot of that is to fool the proletariat. Because the proletariat must constantly be tricked and fooled out of necessity, right? To where they can look away. And that's that's a key point that Millennial Steam was hitting on in his videos on my post tab. That's probably why some of the people left. They went to go check that video out, which is great. I hope they do. Do that now, in fact, if one wants to. This is here for now, right? I'll be here right up until I'm not. And that's always true, right? Within the context of a world of death and a game of lies. Certainly. But it's that, it's this assumption that, and it's part of the whole thing of, well, when things get bad enough, people are going to revolt and rise up. It's like, well, no, they're not. But, that's a simple logic shows that, well, if I can make the case that it's been bad enough for quite some time, that proves that no, things getting bad enough will not cause a revolution. And then if we look at Kaczynski, I'm convinced, my opinion is that based on the writings of Kaczynski, all such revolutions and uprisings will only ever serve to perpetuate and strengthen the system itself anyway. So, the system can't lose, right? And then more and more I'm seeing, and Millennial Steam revealed that a lot of what he studied in university was World War II, Germany during World War II, right? And then probably, I'm assuming, whether he studied it directly, he would have to be quite familiar with Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Gulag Archipelago. And that's, Americans are now, undeniably, America's being operated as some version of, Soviet Russia in the early, whenever that was. Solzhenitsyn. Work camps, political prisoner camps, which is in some way, and then not, the idea of the Jays in Nazi concentration camps. And if you look at what is claimed to have been done at the level of labor, whether it happened or not, well, what that functions as is they were laden with a burden that could not be carried. And that is a slow process of death. It's to be, whether it's, hey, this person is starving and they're given a certain amount of food, and then here's a 50-pound boulder to put on your shoulder and carry it up to the top of these stairs, basically. And then some people are going to fall halfway and die. And then some people are going to get to the top and a sadistic guard is just going to kick them back down the stairs, right? And then who cares, because there's always trains or buses or, whatever, however the people are conveyed to the camp, there's always more arrivals. See? So in fact, the system itself needs to get rid of some of these people. And that is America today. It's just, it's in a different form. Employment or survival, or in order to access, calories, right? Well, the system clearly, at any time it wants to, it controls the levers that determine, how much of this food and calories can the general public access, right? And so I think this is what a particular channel that has either been hidden or no longer exists meant when they talked about humanity as dependent upon these systems, right? Well, what I am can never be dependent on a system in a world of death and a game of lies. That's not possible, see? And what's interesting is the moment I read that, I had a very visceral reaction, because I knew that, well, that's not even, that's not possible. But the intuition said, well, no, that's wrong. But the intellect did not yet understand why and how. It's because Benton doesn't have to consume a certain number of calories. Within a slow process of death, there's no requirement to access a certain number of calories. If the siege of Stalingrad, I always forget if it's Stalingrad or Leningrad, when whoever didn't flee the city, or, whoever wasn't sent out of the city, the ones that did not starve to death, they subsisted on just these insanely low rations for a year and a half or whatever. And see, if you look at how obese Americans are, at the level of deprivation, it hasn't even started, until you or I begin to see people in public and think, wow, that person used to be 300 pounds. Now look at them. They're gaunt. They're skeletal. See? Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm saying that if the system decides to do that, then that's what's going to happen. But what's the result of doing that to a populace? It makes them strong, because everybody who's bitch made and weak don't survive. They're gone. They either go somewhere else or they die. And they probably don't manage to, if they have managed to procreate, see what I mean? It makes the populace very, very, very strong. See? So if the system is operating in a way that it needs, or it's making use of a weak American populace, which is what we have. This is a very, very weak, bitch-made populace, right? Very weak, very bitch-made. Well, if the system says, okay, now it's time to change, and just like America was built up at the level of infrastructure, only to be allowed to decay, right? And this idea of America being the richest nation in the history of the world, it's not. No, it never was, and it's not. That's not even possible. What are you talking about? That's just, it's such a ridiculous lie, but people believe it, and they repeat it. Well, to hear something and repeat it, that's propaganda by definition. That is propaganda. So every time somebody thinks they're being cute and sarcastic and says, you will own nothing and you will be happy, that's propaganda. That's the individual is choosing to participate in propaganda and doesn't even know it, right? Now it may not be any better or justifiable when Benton, because I just repeated it, but I understand that it's propaganda. Well, and I mean dictionary definition of the term propaganda, which propaganda has become so just part of life that if you read the dictionary definition, it basically says this doesn't even really have a meaning anymore. it's more or less just, it's so taken for granted at this point. It's because it in the past it would have needed to be unusual in a way. It's like, oh well, the default state was no propaganda, and then propaganda sort of, and this is the way it's framed. Whether or not this was the reality, I'm sure it's debatable. But now we're to the levels of it's just all propaganda all the time. Well, at that point, there's really no need to call it propaganda. It's like, yeah, what's not propaganda? All communication eventually becomes propaganda, and that's part of the messaging of 1984, Orwell's 84. It's like, newspeak, and the language and how people censor themselves, how people express themselves, right? And it all eventually just becomes propaganda and functions as propaganda, to further strengthen the system and then to further ensnare the individuals in the psychology. Because make no mistake, Benton's already claimed victory over this system of things, because Benton's psychology was and still is a product of this system of things. And so the transcendence of what was designed to trap and ensnare, to move beyond what, typically speaking, represents a trap and a snare, right? And to intelligently work within the confines of that, but beyond the confines, but also simultaneously within the confines. That is the victory. That's the quickening spirit. That's what that is. That's what I am. See? And it's always there to be tapped into. Now, again, if other people, it's for them to figure out if that's what they are made of or not. It's not, has nothing to do with Benton. That's on whoever it's on. None of my business, ultimately. Right? Because spiritually, this is a wholly individual experience, and Benton is a spiritual warrior genius. That's what I am, right? And always have been, and always will be. And the realm, this system that makes an enemy of what I am, is set up to, from day one, teach me ideas quite to the contrary, so that the being will forget what they are. See, and now we have John 14:26, the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, teaching me all things and bringing unto my remembrance. Well, that's my own spirit doing that, right? Worshipper and worshipee contained within the same space. See, my cup runneth over, the continuous renewing of the Spirit. That's what that is. And so the prayers in the Psalm 23, in some ways, this is spell casting, or it's a, vibrational, energetic, again, word of God as a sharp sword that goeth out of the mouth, right? It's symbolic, right? And it's authoritative. It's not dogma, doctrine, obligation, teamwork, join a church, join a building, right? Join an organization, a corporation, a business. It's none of that. It's course correction. It's commitment. It's, after the little death of sleep, waking up the next morning, and it's like, hey, here we go again. Better get right first thing in the morning. Then that's Benton talking to Benton. Everybody else, they're going to do whatever they're going to do. That's called society, LOL. Everybody's going to do whatever they're going to do. So, lashing out at this dispatcher, that's going to happen. Inevitably, invariably. It's fighting fire with fire, because that person chose to communicate in certain manipulative, strategic ways that he created his own undoing, in a way, if that makes sense. He did that, almost like a dance partner. Like, okay, well, to dance a tango with a dance partner that the being does not understand. That's a very dangerous thing, potentially, if the being isn't able to protect themselves and is then perhaps deeply hurt as a result. Right. Because society and word of mouthing and common sense, so called, has taught that, well, you have these people from the backwards parts of America, and some of them will end up in these trucking companies like me, right? And there's a promotion of these people are, a certain type of person, right? And a lot of that's propaganda. A lot of that's propaganda and hype. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Again, to finally realize, oh, wait a minute, this guy's way smarter than I am. And then is it possible to access, those levels of humility, right? It's a lack of humility. And so Benton gets called arrogant and egoic and all of this and prideful, but I can tell when somebody's way more intelligent than me, and it's whatever their other characteristics are, the humility is to just accept that, okay, this mentally ill homeless person, who's otherwise unattractive and, has these negative qualities, is levels beyond me intellectually and is in fact proving it in the moment. And now I'm free to reject it. I'm free to just not accept, right, that's happening, but it doesn't mean it's not happening, right? And then again, it's not about Benton's intelligence. It's about, how about we just stay out of Benton's wheelhouse, right? One of which is arguing. How about let's just not argue with Benton, right? Let's just not do that, Now people can critique the performance and say, well, you got emotional and you lashed out. Well, yeah, you can call it that. Or a sharp sword came out of my mouth, and you can call that the word of God, and it shing, and it did what it did. Right. That's Bruce Lee's fist that, it's trained and it just hits for itself. There's not even a thought. It just does what it does. And Benton watches it do what it do. And his only concern is to make sure that he observes the dead flesh so that it doesn't fall into, wrath or, bullying this person or, abusing them, right? Or identifying with the power dynamic where, well, now I'm the strong one and he's the weak one, and now I'm going to rub his face in it. That all belongs to the dead flesh. It's just, you mess with the bull, you get the horns. And this company will do a version of that to me at some point. I'll mess with the bull and I'll get the horns. That's just how this works. But will I have my feelings hurt? No, of course not. For all I know, yesterday when they said, okay, I delivered my load and they're like, go to the nearest truck stop. For all I know, they're going to tell me to clean the truck out and hit the fucking bricks. I don't know what's going to happen. And that's a possibility any moment of any day in truck driving. Now people will hear that and they'll go, well, it shouldn't be that way. How dare they? It's like, what do you mean it shouldn't be that way? That's the way it is. Again, Benton as nigger, right? Benton as temporary, get in where you fit in, ad hoc grassroots, temporarily signing myself into indentured servitude to live in a unair conditioned big rig where now I'm on a 34-hour restart. Nobody told me. Nobody said, hey, you're going to take a 34. I wasted yesterday when I could have done things in my personal life, but well, Benton's behaving like a nigger coolie. He doesn't have a life. And in fact, part of me getting the job was like, hey, I don't care about home time. I don't have a life. And the trucking company is set up to try to facilitate the drivers going home, because that's one of the few ways that trucking companies compete for labor as well. We'll promise and do our best to get them to their families at some point, right? Well, once the trucking company figures out, oh, this is actually some bizarro person you know, who wants to live in a truck. You know, we've basically hired a homeless person off the street. Yeah. In the transition to self-driving trucks, which is already well underway, you know, again, now we're back to the arbitrage opportunities. And, you know, if you want to view capitalism and businesses as competing, then one of the ways to compete is to the competition. The only reason the arbitrage opportunity is there, in part, the reason why the arbitrage opportunity is there is because other businesses that could have detected it and took advantage of it haven't. So it's an opportunity, see. But then it comes with drawbacks and costs, right? Such as it hurts your dispatcher's feelings sometimes, right? And see, this is what people don't like about capitalism, is because, again, they look away. This was what Millennial Steam is saying, is what society assumes is that the people will always boldly face what's happening. But no, they can choose to delude themselves by looking away. So at a certain point, I was being gaslit as if I was a lazy person in my 40s for sitting around a public park in Eugene, Oregon, instead of having a job and, air quotes, contributing to society. And it was these young fellas who were behaving like Jesus freaks, not in a good way. And, you know, at a certain point, I'm sitting down at a fucking table with them, and they're implying that there's somehow something wrong with me for not seeking employment. And I said, listen, man, the system is failing by letting me sit here. And they're like, what do you mean? Because remember, they were raised and indoctrinated with bootstrapping, right? They're like, what are you talking about? I said, I have skills, and this is before truck driving, but I have skills and things I could be doing, and the system could figure out what environment suits me as a worker and what amount of money to pay me that I'm willing to work for, and it's letting me sit here at a picnic table. I said, that's its failure. And they just couldn't even believe the audacity to speak that way, but I was right. And eventually the system figured out, surprise, surprise, right about the time Trump was getting elected for the first time, it figured out how to get me into employment. It did that. I didn't do that. I'd been thinking about truck driving for many years. I always kind of had that in my back pocket. And in fact, I maintained my driver's license while not owning or driving a car for many years, you know. And I used to tell the cops, because I only ever got one ticket, you know, living that vagabond, traveler, homeless lifestyle. Because I used to tell them, I said, listen, if y'all write me a ticket, I have a driver's license. I have to come back here and go to court. Like, for real. And they knew I was serious. I said, I'm going to leave here. I'm leaving here anyway. I ain't staying here. I'm traveling, buddy. But if you write me a ticket, I'm going to have to come back here and go to court. So I don't look, because the first thing that happens when I don't pay my tickets is they suspend my license. Right. It's a game, and I know the game. So do y'all really, and it's like, okay, it's actually, I'm explaining to them why it's in their best interest not to write me a ticket, because then I'm going to come back. And so that's part of how I maintained my license for all those years, because I knew I had it in my back pocket that I could get a CDL at some point, right? And so that was the reality. And those young folks, they hated it because the system is set up to spiritually attack the individual. Hey, Benton, you're wicked and fallen for sitting here day after day in a public park. Meanwhile, they were sitting day after day in a public park with me. But then they were maintaining the appearance of, well, no, they're trying to get jobs. You know, they're trying to, I think they were students maybe. Oh, we're you know, but you can tell when somebody's not that serious about their studies, right? They're playing a game, you know. It's like, why did they have all this time to hang out with homeless people in the park? See what I'm saying? Well, system agents, whether they know it or not. See, system agents. And mocking God or mocking what I am, you know, as behaving like these Jesus freaks. sometimes to comical fashion. This idea that they're going to, Jesus hung out with the homeless, so that's what I guess that was their justification. It's like at a certain point, they're grown ass men, ostensibly grown ass men, hanging out in a public park, trying to settle my hash and get in my face about me being a grown ass man hanging out at a public park. It's like, well, okay. But then utilizing logic and reason and saying, well, actually, if capitalism is what it says it is, it's failing by letting me sit here, because clearly this economic system is based on the continuous expansion of profit, manufacturing, the whole thing. It has to continue to expand. At least it has to seemingly expand. So the fact that it's letting me sit here, it's failing. I'm not failing. It's failing by letting me do this. And in fact, that is an arbitrage opportunity in some way. And eventually it was figured out. And guess who benefited the most was, surprise, surprise, one of the biggest van truckload carriers called Snyder National, because I did a whole bunch of very lucrative truck driving for them for what I now look at was a very, very low wage comparatively, but I didn't know any different and didn't care. And then also I received the benefit of, actually getting the experience, the first year's experience, see. But it's not my job to bootstrap and go out there and make all that happen for myself. It's the system's job to facilitate it, see. Because otherwise, of what use is the system? And I don't mean to the people, of what use is the system if it can't, it has to be able to do those things. But it's only ever going to do those things for its own purposes and for the purposes of what it serves and what it bows down to, right? And so simultaneously, this system operates to make sure that the public at large bows down before the one it serves. And that's evil and wickedness and everything fallen, death itself, a slow process of death. That's what is going on here. Like it or not. Like it or not, that's what's happening, see? And again, it's to accept first, right? But then to expect. So my failures recently haven't been in acceptance. They've been in failing to expect what has been accepted, because then it can just sneak up on me, right? Which does happen. And it snuck up on me when I lashed out at this dispatcher, see? But then there's no anger that yesterday they played a game, and this is part of the reason that they pay me. So if I actually, and I don't even know, I won't know till they pay me, but if they actually pay me to sit around a truck stop for 34 hours or longer, what are they paying for? They're paying for the flexibility of, yesterday I had enough hours to go pick a load up, but then I did not have enough hours to do anything else on my 70-hour clock. So I could pick the load up and then maybe get out of Houston. Maybe not. It might have been he's at a truck stop, he's going to go pick a load up, and he's going to have to immediately park at a truck stop because of how much traffic there is in Houston, right? But the flexibility is, if they can find a load with a long enough of a time frame, then that's to their benefit, because at midnight I get like 9 hours. That's called recaps. And I know this and they know this, or they should know it. They can know it. Now, does my dispatcher just not understand his job well enough to run me on recaps? Well, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. I don't know. Because he could be strategically not letting me know that he knows how to run me on recaps. Or he just maybe, what I suspect is that he's a bullshit artist and he's bullshitted his way into this job that he doesn't really know how to do. And his strategy is to run the fucking driver ragged and then do a restart. It's like, well, wait a minute, buddy. I can just work 7 days a week for 6 months. Like, what's going to make the company more money? Well, if the dispatcher can dispatch me properly, potentially that's going to be to run me every day. But I don't even care. But it's the part where it would have been nice to know when I arrived at this truck stop yesterday that I was done for the day. But if they're going to pay me $257 to not know that I'm done for the day, well, that's worth $257. I already made a delivery, right? It's worth it. So they could be taking, again, it's another arbitrage opportunity, because what they're trying to do is find a desperate broker. But on a Monday, it's not that likely. See, if it was the end of the week, they'd have a lot greater, especially a Thursday or a Friday, they can find a desperate broker and then they can negotiate a high rate. Does that make sense? It's just that either he's inexperienced or maybe he's hurt from me lashing out at him, right? Although I typically wait and do it when it's proper, right? When I have a good reason to lash out at somebody. It was lashing out nonetheless. I'll own it. I'll own the lashing out part of it. And then I called him at the end of the day and was like, hey, what are we doing? Am I running tomorrow, or are we, 34-hour restart? And then I'll go do my shopping today. But it's a big pain in the ass because I'm in Houston. And, I probably would have positioned myself better yesterday had I known, but it's fine, because if they're going to pay me, even if they don't pay me, well, I'm living in a truck. So what's the fucking difference anyway? And I'm always staying stocked up as much as possible. I've got enough provisions for at least a couple of days, if it comes down to it. And this is where we get back to the $1,800 a week. It sounds like a lot of money, but not when you look at what actually needs to be spent. And so, when I bought I spent $20 on dark chocolate at a Whole Foods that I didn't even know was there. It just happened to be close to the delivery. Well, I should have bought everything they had, right? So I should have done. So part of this, what seems to be a decent amount of money, is, well, my opportunities to purchase products of value are limited. So people don't even know the effects of these substances. Dark chocolate's very good for the teeth. I know it's counterintuitive, but especially with me buying the kind that doesn't have sugar in it. So now I'm like 3 or 4 days off the dark chocolate. I can already tell my teeth are becoming sensitive, right? I need to get back on the dark chocolate. Because this idea of remineralizing the teeth, well, apparently dark chocolate does that quite effectively. And then my teeth are discolored and stained, and, dental fluorosis and all of this. Well, who cares? I'm 50. It used to be normal for a 50-year-old to have discolored teeth. That used to be normal. Like, what's the expectation? And then I'm gaining weight. I need to gain weight. Well, now my face is filling out, and people are looking at me different because, well, now his face is not quite as attractive when we imagine it on our social media. Well, who cares? Why? I cut my hair in part to receive less attention at the supercenter, so I can do my shopping and be left the fuck alone. But then it's like, okay, well, Benton, you, like everybody else, love attention. Like, on some level, it's like, where's my attention? But then part of it is, look, buddy, you're a white guy wandering around Houston in the short term. Like, I don't want to expect attention. But when I was 120 pounds, I still got it at the Supercenter in Houston. I remember it. And I didn't really understand it. But as I'm gaining weight, I'm realizing, oh, it's because they want a particular male face on their social media. It's completely about them. It's got nothing to do with me, right? And the more and I'm one of these people, when I gain weight, it goes to my face first, which is fine. But it's like, yo, man, do you want attention, or well, both, I guess. I want attention, and I want to be left alone. And that's the dead flesh, right? Benton doesn't want that. That's the dead flesh. See, and then, so the transcendence of that, or the quickening spirit, is to accept that fully and then move beyond it, right? Say, well, yeah, the same person who cuts his hair because he doesn't want to be chased around the grocery store, or the Walmart. Well, the moment that the moment that attention is seemingly gone, it's like, well, wait a minute, where's my attention? And it's not even that he wants the attention. It's like, it's the irrational fear that it may not return. See? It's the irrational fear that it may not return. Well, who cares? This is a slow process of death anyway. You know, just like the teeth are discolored. It's like, well, what are the job of the job of the teeth is to chew the motherfucking food, right? Who cares what they look like, you know, in the context of chewing the food? But yeah, I mean, of course I care. The dead flesh cares. And it's not going to amount to a hill of beans. And that's the, to be a human in this wicked, wicked, dead, fallen world. You know, it's to manage and intelligently move through all of these aspects. So when we get to, you know, a so-called truth community, panel verse, personality politics, and I see these people at the Modern Men Lost Again channel, shout out to Landry, you know, it's people, and I don't mean Landry, I see there's people in the channel, and a lot of them, you know, I'm aware of these people. You know, I've had my own dealings with a lot of these folks, and am certainly willing to have dealings with these folks, but you know, it's all seems to always come back to this notion of community and externalities, and, you know, working together and projects. There's nothing to do, folks. There's nothing to be done. If you want to have a support group, have a support group. Hell, I'll probably show up for the support group, you know. But why, let me ask you this, why does it have to constantly be dressed up as if, well, it's going to have projects and it's going to represent something and it's going to move forward? Because anything else is viewed as cope. Well, what's not a cope? You know, I would say anything that doesn't seem to be cope, the person just hasn't removed their perspective far enough. They're still too close. You know, it's the whole forest for the trees thing. You know, so when I get accused of, oh, well, that sounds like cope, it's like, well, yeah, this is a slow process of death. It's what's not a cope. Everything's a cope. What are you talking about? You know, the beings is simply not looking from a far enough extrapolated perspective to understand that it's all cope. And in some ways, the idea of, well, you know, problem solving to create something. So it's a recognition that society, LOL, is fallen and wicked and improper. And it's okay, well, loop into problem solving and show that it can be done. Well, that's, to me, that's a bastardization. That's to bastardize the Christ story. Because the Christ story shows the way to, here's how the individual can overcome and move beyond all of these things internally. And then if you have 10 individuals who've done that, well, then probably they can all come together, right? And exist and so-called co-create, whatever that means. See? But the fallen individuals, what are they going to do? You know? Can they come together and do something collaboratively? Yeah, sure. And what's that? Is that going to be any better than whatever society LOL is putting out? No, it's going to be worse. It's going to actually most likely be below the standard of whatever society LOL is performing, which is, it sounds insane, but I suspect that to be the case. And probably everybody knows that individually, and it's why they can't go to a place and do a thing. And I noticed, you know, years ago, what I told the truth community was, you know, until individuals go to a specific location and just commit to staying there and doing a thing, even if we don't even know what the thing is, right? And I say we because I might perhaps be willing to do that, probably not. But, you know, the reality is, if you had even 10 people, once 10 people arrived at a physical location, start the clock on who's calling the cops first. I'm saying your over-under is 48 hours before the authorities are called in. 48 motherfucking hours, right? Now, does Benton and his clean criminal history want to subject himself to that? No, absolutely not. Why would I? What's in it for me? So the economics of the thing means that it's an endless series of discussions that can't ever go anywhere. So then now we see Landry's face bebopping around a physical environment, just like we've seen Benton's face bebopping around a physical environment, right? Or Paul Enslaved's his face bebopping around bebopping might not be the proper term, but you know what I mean, a physical environment, right? Because solo, it's more controllable, and it's easier to mitigate the risks. So it becomes economic at a certain point. It becomes what is potentially gained versus what is the value of something that could be lost, such as the fact that I don't have a criminal record. But next thing you know, it's like, oh my God, dragged into court under accusations of, some form of breaking of a law, right? Because somebody called the cops, But then what would the truth community, especially based on how the truth community views law enforcement, I think a lot of people, the conventional wisdom or the common sense would be, well, these people aren't going to call the cops. Oh, bullshit. Get 10 of them together for 48 hours. And then, if I could, bet money, I'll bet $1,000 somebody's calling the motherfucking cops, as long as nobody knows that I've made that bet. Now, as soon as people know that I've made that bet, it changes the nature of the whole thing. I'm doing thought experiments and speaking, just in a vacuum, right? So if I'm a strategic enough thinker to foresee these things, I can't play the fool. There's not enough potential upside for me to play the fool. Somebody's got to provide resources, and that's where you get into like an Owen Benjamin idea of, well, donate all this money and then I'll buy this land and then you guys can come here and live. Well, it turns out legally that's just not even possible, right? Because Owen Benjamin probably did have a true intention initially, right? Now we can say, well, he should have been intelligent enough to understand that this is not doable legally. Well, maybe not. I don't know. He's intelligent doesn't mean he's strategic. I would have known, well, you can't just buy a bunch of land and have randos show up. At some point there's going to have to be insurance, and what's Owen Benjamin's net worth, right? Like he's got enough to lose. He can be sued individually. Like you can't, now he can lose everything he's worked to acquire. Like it's just not doable. You see what I'm saying? Same thing here. Now you can have a bunch of homeless people can show up somewhere and squat on private land somewhere, right? Until they're discovered and made to leave, right? Well, now at that point, now we're vagabonding, right? Well, I've already done that. And so now the truth community, and this is not a criticism, this is just sort of showing where things lie, is, now I'm hearing there's been all this Slab City talk, and it came up again when I popped into Landry's yesterday for I think I listened for about 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes, and even managed to listen to Snafu Snaps, which I almost always just click off a stream the moment I hear his voice, but managed to tolerate him. Although he was talking to Paul Enslaved, it was a replay of another stream, I guess. So, Snafu's not going to be able to dominate that particular conversation, right? So, guess who's camped for months at a time, multiple times at Slab City? Benton, right? So Benton already has the key information to why don't go to Slab City, right? Now, you can go there if you want to, but most people are not going to be able to remain there. Number one, there's no sanitation. And can a human who hasn't adapted to vagabonding and homelessness, or even van life, which is, that's another horror inflicted upon the populace. It's another psyop, van life as a concept. But, I don't believe the modern American can even conceptualize there's no toilets. There's no running water. There's nowhere to poop, folks. Now, yeah, there's There's latrines dug, 30 feet into the fucking dirt, the desert ground. People dig 30 feet down or whatever it is, however far down they dig. I've seen them dig. I've been there long enough that there wasn't a hole there. And then it took them several days. People dug a fucking latrine. Right? I've watched it happen. And I won't even describe some of the things I've seen. It's too gross, even for me, who's not easily grossed out by some of these things. Right? So are we really going to have a conservative or right-leaning truth community is going to go out into the desert, right? The Sonoran desert, but it's not the middle of nowhere. I don't think people realize it's like 100 miles from Los Angeles. This is not the middle of nowhere. It's Brawley is a 30 to 40-minute car ride to the supercenter, folks. I'm very familiar with the area. There's a truck stop in Mecca about 40 minutes away but then you're going to need to go through the government checkpoint. There's a border patrol checkpoint between Slab City and the truck stop in Mecca, right? Which is, if anybody needs to panhandle, you're really looking at the supercenter in Brawley or the truck stop in Mecca. Of course, they're going to run you off pretty quick. And then panhandling's just dead nowadays, which is fine. I mean, who cares? Adapt and overcome. But this is the lifestyle. We're talking about people who are willing to go live and squat on a patch of dirt, next to a naval gun range. So now I have just this mythos of Slab City, and people don't even know what that is. It's like, well, I've been there for months at a time, and I've revealed some of these details. And has anybody heard the details and clung to them? No, of course not. Why would they? Because they're living in a fantasy land, whether they know it or not. And that's fine to live in a fantasy land. Again, Krishnamurti taught me that it's completely fine to exist within a fantasy land as long as the individual understands that they exist within a fantasy land. The problem is when the individual doesn't understand that they're fantasizing. That's the problem. It's okay to live in a fantasy world, right? And it's not a community in the sense of when I went there, I'll just tell the story of when I went there. Why not? Until I think of something else to divert onto. But let me take a quick break and we'll talk some Slab City if anybody's interested in that. Because I feel like, well, I'll review my notes and I'll write down Slab City because that's always there. I can tell all of that. Stories, history, Benton's history at Slab City. And I'm known there. I mean, if I could go there tomorrow and there'll be a few people there who remember me and know me by name. Like, not a lot, but, it will happen. I know some of the slabbers, and the slabbers means they generally, a person has to spend at least 2 consecutive summers there to be considered a slabber. And I'll never be a slabber because I have no interest in going there in the summer whatsoever. It's 130 degrees at times. No, thank you. Not interested. And people die every summer, of course, but that happens everywhere. People die everywhere every summer, right? That's not even out of the norm, but the conditions directly kills at least a couple of people every year. And anyway, BRB. All right, we're still here. We're gonna make some eggs, make some egg drink. Yeah, Slab City stories. Yeah, we'll do some Slab City stories. Uh, it'll be a long setup, but let me see what we got for battery. Yeah, all right, we got time. We got time. So I had always heard one of the common refrains in a person who lived that traveler, homeless lifestyle, the vagabond, the train riders. I've never been a train rider, but I strapped on the giant hiking backpack. The dirty kids, right? These subcultures in America, and I, hitchhiked and traveled and panhandled and slept rough, and I lived that lifestyle for about 6 straight years, and off and on for even more. And you used to see these people way more regularly. You just see, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 people with the gigantic backpacks and a lot of times the Carhartt pants that you could tell they've been wearing for months, if not years. And a lot of them are, again, train riders and dirty kids, but that becomes it's a subculture. And so, whether they like me, whether these people, and a lot of anarchist types, a lot of lefty types, Antifa types, and communists and all this, and a lot of that, and younger people than me typically, but not necessarily. And of course, I was in my mid-30s when I first started doing that, and met some people that sort of showed me the ropes, at least of hitchhiking. And so what I learned is, once the person is doing that thing, the other people who are doing that thing sort of have to accept me, because everybody works together, right? Like, it doesn't really work for somebody to go live that lifestyle if the other people who are also living that lifestyle, they kind of have to work together at times, right? And you see this with street level drug addicts too. They actually work together quite effectively, in my observations. They whether they like each other or not, whether they want to get along, even maybe they're robbing each other and they're victimizing each other, but they still, when it's time for them all to get their drugs of choice or whatever it is, they're working together quite effectively. As my caffeine addiction increases, the acceleration of the caffeine addiction continues unmitigated, or unabated. That's the word. And so when one, in the past puts themselves into this lifestyle, they start hearing about certain places. Austin was a big place that used to be heard about back in the day. But then what I learned also is that, once I start to hear, once the word is out on a place, it's over with. So Austin probably was really fucking awesome. But then once it starts just being talked about all the time, that's how you kind of know it's over with, right? You sort of have to catch it early. So once I would hear about it here and there, and then I heard about it more and more and more. Same thing with Slab City. I would hear about it here and there. And then it got to where almost every time I met one of these traveling people, it was like, have you been to Slab City? And it kind of became like a cool thing to do, right? And I never viewed it as, well, this is going to be some cool thing to go do, because I already knew, well, it's probably fucked out. The fact that I'm hearing about it means it's already fucked out to some extent. That's just how that works, right? And which is fine. But, it's to know these things and to be able to understand. So I had no interest in going there as a destination, but then after I finally, and it took me years, but I finally convinced ex-wife number 2 to come on the road with me. And we were in the area because she has relatives in nearby Hemet, which is in the IE, which is Riverside County, which borders Imperial County, and that's where Slab City is, Imperial County. So it's important to understand these dynamics, folks. Where is Slab City on a map? What's the local environment? And so first you have, if you watch a YouTube video or a documentary, it's like, oh, the last free place in America, and then they're talking about, a city or a town without laws. Well, it's like, what are you talking about? there was very few days in my months at a time of camping out there. You see Imperial County sheriffs almost every day. And if something gets set on fire, Nyland, which is the nearby town, Nyland Fire Department is out there putting it out, right? If it gets big enough. And I've seen some big enough fires where Nyland Fire Department showed up and put it out. So this idea that there's not services, well, if you get to Nyland, there's a bus that will take the person to a food stamp office where they can get food stamps, right? So this idea that it's just like in the middle of nowhere and it's its own like self-sustaining thing. Well, no, it's not. It's as much within the context of this system of things as anything else. And it abuts a naval gun range. Meaning at times the motherfucking government flies over on bombing raids. Like no bullshit. Like I've been driving my car down the road from Slab City to Nyland, and then here comes like 4 fucking Black Hawk helicopters fly over me, and I watch them fly over, and then they go do a fucking bombing raid, right? Because they're training on how to blow shit up on the other side of the map, right? It's kind of cool to see, right? You hear automatic gunfire and all kind of crazy shit. You know, I remember there's an artist colony called East Jesus, and I'd been there for about a month, and I finally just walked over to East Jesus to check it out. And as soon as I got to the front gate of East Jesus, fucking automatic gunfire rang out. It was just like, you know, again, the waking dreams, surrealistic unreality, right? It's like this isn't real on some level. You know, to be reminded, well, this isn't actually real on some level. You know, that was interesting. The timing of these things, right? And it's pretty cool, you know, people taking pictures of it, and, you know, there's YouTube videos about it. But apparently the land is such of a low value or whatever that at some point somebody gave it to like the California Teachers Retirement Fund or something. Like you can't really even make this up. And then I guess they don't want it. So it just sort of became this just kind of land that it's technically owned, but like nobody really gives a fuck about it. But then the system, you know, does the system, nature abhors a vacuum, and the system is certainly natural in that way. So like, you know, and then, you know, I'm almost certain that special forces trains out there, like the Navy SEALs and all of this, you know, whatever, when you talk about a federal government military installation right next door, this idea that the government doesn't know exactly what's happening over there at all times, right? Like that doesn't. So yeah, go hang out, go listen to what may very well be agents, right? Whether, again, you know, I've made the case that everybody functions as a sysagent or a systems agent on some level. So yeah, listen to a bunch of agents over the internet and go squat, meaning squat over a hole that somebody dug so you can poop because there's no sanitation. Go out there and squat, right? Because there's no toilet. And even what passes for a toilet is like a version of an outhouse, right? But yeah, go squat because some agents of the system told you it was a good idea. Like, I mean, what are we even talking about? And again, I needed free camping. Me and ex-wife number 2, we were both over it by then. And, you know, Hemet had done us in to some extent. And she had a car. You know, she showed up with a Honda Accord. And I'm not going to be able to leave this window. Hang on, I'm not going to be able to leave this window up and then keep talking. But I need to at least change the air in here real quick. And where are my paper towels? Aha. right, that's good enough. At least get a little fresh air in here. Good enough diploma. All right. And bear with me. We'll. I'm not so great at the multitasking, so we'll get there. We'll get there. So again, I never would have went there if not for the free camp. And this is not me like trying to be cool and above it all. This is the true facts of the matter. And I had researched it enough to understand the dynamics. Is basically you go there and you make your own camp, and then the culture of the place is to respect other people's camps for the most part, although not across the board. So you just kind of pick you a patch of dirt and you use whatever you use to make a boundary around it, and then that's yours, right? You don't own it, but it's yours for the time you're there, right? And so we had a couple of tents and some tarps, and we found and another thing is a lot of people fuck up and they don't know that there's a wash, and that it doesn't rain most of the time, but if you go there in the winter, that is the rainy season, and it can rain quite often, believe it or not. And I've been there when it rained a lot. So the first order of business is don't make your camp in the wash. And unfortunately, because that, to people who don't understand how a wash works, if they want to be away from people, it's easy for them not to understand what a wash is and to end up making a camp in the wash. And it actually happens somewhat regularly that people get washed away. Their camp gets washed away. So we managed to find kind of a low point that wasn't in the wash. And there was like one wooden pole, like a wooden, like for a sign or whatever, a wooden, pole or square pole that somebody had driven in the ground. And so, I was able to make a fucking string for the tarp to some extent, and, just sort of made a roof, and then had the tents under that, right? And there's dust storms, there's strong wind storms. And so, we had our sleeping area, we had our two tents, and, we slept together in one of the tents. And, for cooking and to be out of the wind, it's good to have a second tent and all of this. This is fucking primitive. This is primitive camping, folks. So, like, have you ever primitively camped? Well, I had already primitively camped. Meanwhile, we had a car, we had food stamps. Again, people can judge that all they want. We had both had food stamps, and we had a car, and we could go to the fucking supercenter. And if we couldn't make it to the supercenter, there's a grocery store 7 miles away in Nyland, but it's it's very expensive, right? So we're not in the middle of nowhere, and so we spent the first month hanging out at our camp together because we enjoyed each other's company and we needed to rest and just do nothing and chill the fuck out. So what we did was we both liked the sun. So she would be in her bikini out in the sun, at the camp, and I'd be out there, doing whatever I was doing all day. And somebody had this, I had this radio somebody had given me. It was one of those ones that it takes batteries, but it also has the windy thing, and it's solar, so used to be, I don't know if there still is, but there was a Slab City radio station, and they played like really fucking cool music most of the time. So we listened to that, and just kind of hung out and did our own thing for like a whole month. But I got to where and didn't interact with anybody. And then, I got to where I was exploring the area on foot by myself. And then, as the man, it's kind of my job in my world. It's like, I need to go sort of see if this is safe and just see what it's like. Because if I'm going to accompany her, if she's going to accompany me, like, I'm responsible for her safety, right? This is part of why women increasingly don't want anything to do with males, is because males this has kind of been bred out of them, right? It's not really present in a lot of cases. But I don't want to get into that. Hang on, let me digress. Oh yeah, see, I'm off track. We've already boiled the water. See, this is usually timed out a little better, but anyway, doesn't matter. I'm off today. We're off. And I don't have to go anywhere. I can just sit here all day if I want to. It would be to my advantage. I can maybe actually make it to Whole Foods today, possibly. But I don't have to. Yeah, I still got to crack the eggs. Get to crack the eggs. And so I started walking every morning by myself. And, you know, she likes to sleep in if she's able to. She's really good at sleeping. Very, very good at sleeping, which I admired. You know, I was less good at sleeping. As far as I was up early in the morning pretty much, you know, every day by then. Certainly. This was like late 30s, early 40s, I guess. Trying to think of when this would have been. Would have been right about 40 years old, I guess. Yeah, I think that's about right. Yeah, 2015-ish. Somewhere in there. Excuse me. 2014, 2015. And so I started hanging out at the internet cafe every morning. And got to know some of the folks there. And, you know, there's a lot of pot smoking, drinking of coffee. And that was the thing historically. And if there's a documentary, I think it's called Desert Coffee, and it's about the internet cafe, in which the internet cafe had Wi-Fi, which was spotty, but it had Wi-Fi, and it had coffee in the mornings, and it had solar, so electricity. This is all a big deal, right? In this environment, primitive, you know, in a primitive camping environment where you pretty much you show up with whatever you have and then you make it happen, right? Which, you know, that's appealing to a lot of people, and you know, rugged individualists, right? And so then eventually, you know, she would start. I don't remember if maybe she was driving. I don't remember how she got there, but maybe I would go back and get her later. I don't exactly remember. It's funny how the memory works, but at a certain point, she'd show up later on eventually. And ex-wife number 2, very charming, very just, you know, people like her and all of that. And, you know, as far as I know, I believe she still goes there every year. I'm almost certain. I know she was going there pretty much every year, you know, in the winter or the off season, and she's pretty much just staying there. Right. That's my understanding. We've kind of lost. I've stopped keeping up with her activities, but I'm sure she's well known out there, even beyond me, right? Which is fine. It's not about that for me. Not, and I'm not saying it is for her either, but I don't know how good or bad my reputation would be necessarily, but this is not really a community that depends on people who have good reputations and who are necessarily upstanding members of society, if that's even a thing, right? Or at least interested in maintaining the appearance of being upstanding members of society. But if you watch that Desert Coffee documentary, I know pretty much everybody in that, and some of them I knew quite well, actually, and spent a lot of time with some of those folks. And then since I had a car, you know, I had a little bit greater access to being accepted, or we did, you know, in a way. It's like we had something to provide because, you know, there's a lot of the people don't have transportation. And everybody needs to go to the super center at some point, right? Everybody needs to go to town at some point. That's how that works. But, you know, it's like, oh, we're, you know, last free place, you know, land without laws and all this. Well, it's like, yeah, but how where's the super center? You know, let's keep it all the way real. Which way to the super center? I mean, we are fucking modern Americans after all. so that's, sort of my, and so look at how much is even, so, and I observed that there were people who would show up and would more or less just, so being at the internet cafe, tourists would show up fairly regularly. And then, so it's kind of the thing was to see, can we get, the people who lived at the internet cafe, in some way trying to get these tourists to donate, right? And then every once in a while they would, sort of keep the whole thing running. It's an elaborate solar setup. The batteries have to be replaced at various times. Coffee, yeah, they're probably getting it with food stamps, but, whatever. Water's a big thing. Got to get the water somehow. There's a nearby canal, but it's like, I don't know. I wasn't trying to drink the canal water, personally. So there's a lot of, just the amounts of bottled water that were necessary, schlepping that back and forth. Yeah, it's interesting. That's an interesting experience. So, I already know that when the so-called truth community is talking about Slab City, they're seeing the YouTube side of it. You can't just go there and start having experiences. Now, if you want to go there and do drugs, there's definitely people who will do drugs with you, especially if you bring the drugs, but even if you don't. But now it's like, okay, what's the individual's ability to handle their drugs, right? Or their alcohol. You can go out there and find somebody to get drunk with. You can go out there and find somebody to do drugs with. But beyond that, there's really no version of just going there for the weekend or for 2 days. It's not penetrable. Like, you can't, there's layers of that onion that you cannot peel back in a day or two. It's just, you'll have a very surface level experience. And I knew that. And meanwhile, we didn't go there to check it out. We went there because we were nearby and we were like, yo, we gotta go somewhere and rest up and just chill the fuck out. And she was new to traveling, and I was expending a lot of energy, managing her experience, right? And it's like, yo, we were both over it by then. And so, like I say, we spent and then just the healing of the sun, being out in the sunlight all day, and just sort of gradually over an extended period of time, sort of insinuating ourselves into various layers of the community, right? And it's a very specific thing out there, and there's no way to really, you can't get the feel for it by watching YouTube videos. It's just simply not possible. It's just not. That doesn't translate. It simply doesn't translate. And so I think what's happening is you got the panel people, and the audience doesn't understand that this is not a place where you can just go there and do IRL strength. It's like, it's not going to happen. Now, could certain people go there and figure it out? Yeah, probably. But as far as groups of people, that is a place people could go and be left alone in the wintertime. But it's a patch. At that point, it's just a patch of dirt that the people are probably not going to get kicked off of. But they might, because the locals, depending on the behavior of the group, the locals might be like, hey, y'all got to get the fuck out of here. And it's like, well, what do you mean? This is the free place. And you're like, okay, well, if you don't think that the people who live here year round know how to get rid of people they don't want around, you're crazy. Of course they do. I've seen people who wore out their welcome have their camp burned to the ground. I've seen it happen, and knew more or less who did it. All right. And then months later, there's their vehicle, their burned out vehicle, still in the same place it was burned out. Right. It's sort of like a symbol to everybody else. That's what we're talking about here, folks. That's the lawless side of it. And it's a constant, in the off season, it's a constant influx of traveling types of people, bohemian types of people, funky hippy dippy types, and we know that the so-called truth community is allergic to a lot of these types of people. They really are. This is not who much of the truth community is trying to hang out with, which is fine. I mean, it's completely fine. Maybe I'm a little more open-minded, but yeah, I'm also annoyed. The hippies also annoy me, right? I call myself half a hippie. Pine Bluff, Arkansas has never produced a hippie. Like, that's a bridge too motherfucking far. And again, it's the delusion. It's the delusion of the so-called truth community. They're delusional, which is fine, but they don't know they're delusional. That's the problem, right? The problem is not the delusion. The problem is not because the world's a delusion. This place is delusion, right? The problem is when the person thinks it's reality, like this world, this vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions. That's not a problem. The problem is when the person thinks that this is altogether real and above board, and gives a flying fuck about you individually or any of us, me individually. Well, it gives a fuck. It gives a fuck as to what it can accomplish based on its purposes. And same thing with Slab City, right? And Slab City chews up and spits out a seemingly, never-ending progression of individuals. And I've seen it. That's what it does, right? And I've seen these things happen. I've seen people fall into drug addiction and mental illness. I've seen, one of the most sweetest, attractive, just wonderful to be around young woman just fall into just mental illness and drug addiction. I've watched it happen, right? And it's sad, man. And nobody will do a damn thing except what? Prey upon that person. Take what is there to take. And again, now we're looking at it. Now we're into an extraction. What can be extracted from that person, right? Because it is survival of the fittest. It's the people who are able to go there and stay there and not be changed by the place. Those are all people with very strong, dominant personalities. So at a certain point, it's me hanging out with 8 or 9 or 10 other people with very strong, dominant personalities, or a smattering of the people who are about to get chewed up and spit out by life, right? Whether it's Slab City or it's Los Angeles, and sometimes it's somebody who got chewed up and spit out by San Francisco or Los Angeles, and this is just, now they're dying of fucking Hep C or whatever, or liver failure, and then this is just where they're gonna live out their remaining days. It's all of that and more. If a person stays there long enough and is able to conduct themselves in a way to not get run out of there, right? Which I've been able to do to some extent. Not that, again, I don't know how warmly I would be received if I were to return, but have no plans of going back, certainly. I could if I needed to. So yeah, that's pretty much it with the Slab City stuff, unless I think of more. Oh, and if you go with a vehicle, the moment you lose traction on the sand, the instinct is to continue accelerating. The moment you know that you lose traction, stop. Do not apply the accelerator. All that does is dig and especially front wheel drive vehicles, but you only have one tire that spins. If you realize immediately, oh, I don't have traction, and if you don't dig down into the sand, and if you let most of the air out of your tire, you have a decent chance of feathering the fucking gas pedal and getting onto solid ground. I know because I've done it. And then at that point, it's okay. Now, who will let me borrow an air compressor to air my tire back up? You know, basic shit like that a person needs to know. But I've watched people just dig their fucking tire into the sand, you know, while I try to tell them, hey, don't do that. And then they got to pay somebody $20 or whatever to get pulled out. And then maybe, you know, maybe they wouldn't have been able to save it. Maybe not. But then I'm wandering by and they're like, can you pull me out? And I was like, no, sure don't. My vehicle can't do that. But, you know, how about next time don't dig your fucking one drive tire. Let's not dig that down into the sand. That's all right. What do you think? I drove all around that motherfucker and I only ever had to let the air out of my tire once. You know, hypervigilance. It's like, well, make sure not to stop on the loose sand. You might be able to get through it if you're already moving, right? But don't stop on it. Yeah, I don't know anything about the crazy cat farm. Well, and things change over time. So, for example, there may still be an actual bar there. I mean, a bar with a bartender and alcohol. Because there wasn't a bar. And then while I was there, this guy called Spaceman built a bar. I watched him build it. So I don't know anything about a crazy cat farm because it must not have been there when I was there. I spent most of my time so when I first went there, me and ex-wife number 2 had our own camp. And then the next time I went and stayed for, I don't know, probably 6 weeks to 2 months, I camped with a trans person at the internet cafe because I'm trying to remember. I guess this was a biological female that had taken hormones, but really wasn't passing as a male, I guess. I'm very accepting of, it's just like, okay, that's a human, whatever. So, I mean, I don't get into it too much personally, but that person basically had this gigantic tent with a divider in the middle. So just let me have half the tent. So that's where I was sleeping. But Pirate Camp was right next door and they played death metal. They got drunk and played death metal all night, every night till like 4 a.m. So if a person could sleep through that. But then Spaceman showed up in his school bus at a certain point, and me and him got along. I guess he was from New Orleans, white guy, leather jacket. I guess he was in his late 20s, and kind of a jock type, but you know, I guess had transitioned into this different lifestyle. And he built the bar. And I forget what he called it initially, and I think it changed to a different name and probably changed hands. But he built that real nearby to the internet cafe. So yeah, I don't know anything about a cat farm, but sounds like a thing to me. Yeah, and it's always growing and evolving and changing, right? And you know, there's like a bike shop, but then maybe it changes hands and somebody else takes it over and runs it. You know, the internet cafe, Rob was in the Desert Coffee documentary. He's the one that runs the internet cafe, but then at a certain point he's had enough, so he turns it over to somebody else. You know, that type of thing goes on. The actual slabs, you know, there's people, those end up getting sold a lot of the time. You know, those will change hands. Oh man, excuse me. A little throat, something going on with the throat chakra. I don't know if it's because I'm talking about all this or what. It's kind of interesting. I'm not really sure. Hobo shoestring. Yeah, I don't know. Well, and then, you know, and this is not a criticism of people. It's I think that's a person I've heard of, but you know, I think it's to my credit that I never really become one of these people, I guess. But there's just these personalities that people kind of attach to a concept, right? And I understand it, but that it's not a criticism, but it's going to sound like one from my perspective, but a lot of people seemingly they need to attach in order to better relate to a concept. They need to sort of attach it to a personality or personalities, which I understand, but that's not been my thing typically. I tend to operate more from the gonzo journalism perspective of just, go and experience the thing directly or not, right? Or not experience it directly. But then people who want to, and I don't mean bulk hungry, this is going to sound like I'm doing this to him, but I'm not. But, some people who are never going to go to Slab City, but then, might want to speak about it authoritatively. And again, it's going to sound like I mean this person but I don't, but it's still going to sound that way. And I can't really do anything about that. But, so I think that's how some of these personalities sort of get introduced into the mix. It's like, well, that person maybe went there or talks about it or makes content from there. Right. And yeah, that may be, but, I would say that you can't really know what's going on out there until you go there. Now you can know some of the facts about what may or may not be happening. That's knowable through YouTube, and it's completely fine. Like I'm a fan of things that I'll never directly experience and have been. Like I get that side of it. But to actually go and experience it, that is like the Hunter S. Thompson gonzo journalism side of it, is to become part of the story, right? And then, what is the being's force of personality, because it's kill or be killed, it's one does not necessarily have to prey on somebody, but it's like, my own ability to not be preyed upon, that a lot of people just don't have that ability to go out into an environment like that and not be preyed upon. And it is a very predatory environment. I will say that. And I grew up in an environment like that, life is cheap, it's kind of up to everybody on some level to sort of, back their own play, if that makes sense. A lot of weirdo sex offenders, a lot of that going on. I'm not, and probably some sex crimes, but definitely a lot of people who, they live there whether year round or much of the year, because there's nowhere else for them to be. I mean, let's just call it what it is. I mean, they've burned bridge after bridge after bridge after bridge, and this is the end of the line for them. They're, whether they die or go to jail, this is the end. And in fact, ex-wife number 2 started spending time with a local. I believe he was a slabber, and she was doing part-time work for this guy. And by then, I was in the process of sort of extricating myself from, this notion of possession or ownership of another person, right? Which is really, that is what, especially growing up in the South and growing up in a Christian context, it is kind of, to be a man in a relationship with a woman in that context, that, that is like my woman and my property to, whether or not that's appropriate or the other person likes it or doesn't like it, it just kind of is that thing, right? And then, I was spiritually, evolving and growing and changing and realizing, well, this isn't even appropriate in the first place. And then, part of my own practice is, well, accepting her for who she is, which I did from day one. And that's the only reason to be in a relationship of 10 years with a person like that without just going completely insane, because, yeah, it's just, that's really the only way to do it. And, in the long term, without just going fucking nuts. And, it's kind of the idea of, if you, I don't know, the whole thing around let it go, and if it returns to you, blah, 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 that type of thing, right? That whole letting go. So like even to be in a relationship with her, she had a 10-year-old son when we met, and with a father who's involved, and I have no desire to raise any children, certainly. And I know I never would have accepted another man. And this, her son is from the same culture I'm from, more or less. And it's like, yeah, I'm assuming he's going to be the same way. And meanwhile, I ain't trying to be a stepdad anyway. So in order to be in a relationship with her and live with her, I had to accept that her son is always going to be above me in her life. And meanwhile, if she's willing to put me ahead of her own son, I don't want her anyway. Right. And then to realize, well, okay, what's best for the child is to be with the mother and father some percentage of the time, meaning anytime she wanted to, she was free to take her happy ass to her ex-husband's house and spend the fucking weekend with her ex-husband, the father of her child, and her child, right? And guess who had absolutely no problem with it? Mr. Benton, right? But then again, she has to be willing to leave Mr. Benton, who knew plenty of women in the area and certainly, likes his alone time, right? And who even knows what, and that was when I was still waiting tables. So I was going out at night, I was playing poker, I was drinking, I was carousing to some extent, It wasn't that unusual for me to be working in the lounge. And this is when I still had the muscles and everything, and, for example, I've been working in the lounge of the Outback, and a woman's come in and just grabbed my ass and copped a feel. And I said, hey, I charged $10 for that. So it was so not unusual that I had a quip already prepared, right? I was living that kind of life. So yeah, if she's willing to go to his house for the weekend and knows what I'm like, it's kind of mutually assured destruction. But then I never strayed in that context. Not in that context. And I don't know, I have no idea what she was doing. Don't know, don't care. Because I ain't trying to raise no children. And I would never get between a man and his son, right? It's like, why would I never even met the guy? And why would I? I had no desire to. If he's okay with his son spending every other week in a house with me and never meeting me, that's on him. Who cares? I don't care. I know I'm trustworthy, and that's good enough for me. Kid never gave me any problems. A couple of times I was like, hey man, how about don't do that? Okay. And he didn't do it anymore. All right. Hey, I got a bunch of cinder blocks out in the yard I used to work out with. How about you don't break them? Okay. All right, I won't. All right, man. We're good. That type shit. Kid was very mature, man. Very mature kid. I don't know what he's doing now. He got an engineering degree, though, from Arkansas State. And smart kid, ran track, cross country. Yeah. Good dude. For sure. I would like to think I helped him think for himself. At a certain point, his mom tried to blame me for him being an atheist. I was like, I believe in God. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, lady. Like, you can't put that on me. He came up with that. I didn't encourage him to be an atheist. Now, was I very critical about organized religion? I'm sure I was. It's not me being responsible for his atheism. Like, what are you talking about? But anyway, that guy, the reason I even bring all that up is somehow he got manipulated. This guy that she was working with over at his camp, he got manipulated into producing a firearm in defense of a woman, and he went to prison in California for some kind of crime involving a firearm. Mm-hmm. That happened while I was there. Yeah, he went to prison. Well, yeah, that's not smart, fella. And so that, just attractive women, and it wasn't my woman, but it was a different woman. He thought he was coming to defense of some woman. Meanwhile, that woman probably created and manipulated the entire situation just to more or less see what this guy would do, you know. And so to be a man in an environment, with attractive females and all this. And by the way, you think you're going to bebop around the country with a charming, flirty, attractive woman. Well, guess what that's going to introduce is other women are going to want a piece of the they're going to want a piece of the pie, right? Like, so now we got the jealousy dynamics. Ex-wife number 2, very jealous for whatever reason. Funny how all that works. Yeah, I agree with that, Bulk Hungry. Yeah, it's I think it's good to remind myself that anybody with a brain who is willing to use it can absolutely come up with everything I'm saying on their own. Yeah, I agree, absolutely. And the reality is, most people simply are not going to in the near term. Now, maybe they will in the long term, because I have, but it's possible for them to attain the same level of understanding, certainly. But yeah, I would say the personality, it has a lot to do with it. But then some people are idea farming. There are people who are farming the ideas and the progression of ideas, because I see and hear the ideas repeated in other formats, and I know that those people are not coming up with those ideas. Now, they might have came up with them eventually on their own, but they've heard me say it, and they have enough intelligence to know when to apply the concepts. And I know that's happening, and it's completely fine. Like, it doesn't matter, right? It's not like, oh, those are my ideas. It's like, well, not really. When I hear somebody else talking about Christ in a very particular way that I've recently been talking about Christ, it's like, okay, well, I'm almost certain I know why they're saying this in this context. It's because now again, whether they listen live or they go back and maybe they get the transcript and they run it through AI or whatever, doesn't really matter. Once I say the concept and then they have the intelligence to take in the concept, then that is a form of technology for them to use for their own purposes. And that's just the way it works. So yeah, I get that part of it, certainly. And ultimately, again, this is all about me from my perspective, right? It's all about me and what do I need to accomplish in this slow process of death, most of which has already been accomplished. Most of it's already been accomplished. But then, where's my mic stand? I made that mic stand. I don't know what I did with it. Is it even worth looking for? Probably not. Yeah, there you go. Bulk Hungry can take it. Yeah, well, that's good. The space bar, that'd be a good name for it. I forget what it was called initially, but it was something kind of hippy dippy sounding, kind of spiritual sounding. I wasn't important, so I've forgotten it. But I was drinking at that time, but nothing crazy. Like probably averaging like a 6-pack of Guinness a day, probably. Had truck driving money too, so I was mostly just hanging out. That time. And, it's definitely a more, now that people knew me to some extent and I had money, it was, of course I wasn't trying to let people know I had money. But, it was quite a different experience than the first time. And then not managing, me and another person, active bitch management. I think that's what Patrice O'Neill called it. Right. And almost picked up a second one to manage, but realized that probably wasn't any future in that. A lot of guys I think are so enamored with the sexual possibilities, but for me it was like, yeah, And she was crazy. The potential second girlfriend was totally fucking crazy, like just in your face nuts, but not in a bad way. She was pretty attractive. Yeah, she was definitely attractive, actually. And she made me vegan food, which I'm not a vegan, but I've had some decent vegan food, I have to say. There's some pretty good, there's some pretty tasty vegan fare out there, believe it or not. And she didn't just make it for me; she made it for everybody. But it was pretty fucking good. Yeah, and that's what's interesting talking about emulation. Dead, bulk hungry. Yeah, exactly. Innovation, and origination versus the parts of my own personality that are you know phony, right? Is that's maybe that would be properly referred to as emulation, right? Sort of just running these processes, emulating these processes to facilitate, you know, but kind of in an auto, just so that I can be on autopilot, so that I can be. It's very selfish and self-serving because a lot of it is so that I can keep doing whatever I need to do, in my own consciousness as a primary process, while the emulation kind of runs in the background, right? And that's how we get into, kind of the phoniness of, starting this truck driving job, and the initial phoniness of dealing with the dispatcher, but then he's a bullshit artist. And, you know, I can only, again, maybe I'm going to get better at it. Maybe I'll get better at letting him bullshit me. Like yesterday, he defaults to bullshitting me because I suspect he knew when I parked here yesterday that I was going to do a 34-hour restart, and I directly asked him what we're doing, and he did not answer the question. You know, and which is fine if they want to. If they say, "Well, we're paying you by the day, and we're going to take advantage of our money that we're paying you, and probably you're going to do a restart, but if we find a lucrative load, we're going to dispatch you on this lucrative load. So we need you to maintain a state of readiness." I understand that you can't just tell that to most drivers; their fucking head will explode. So I understand that it is kind of necessary to play that game. It's just not necessary to play it with me. You can just tell me, "Hey man, we need you to stay ready." But once about 3:30 rolls around, if we haven't told you by 3:30 or 4, just go ahead and do whatever you're going to do. Right. So then that at 4 p.m., I'm calling him on the phone because, what I'm leaving unsaid is, "Hey man, I'm about to start powering down for the day. I got this tea that I want to drink with my last egg drink, and it makes me drowsy. So if I'm about to get a load, I'm gonna put all that off, so I'm not drowsy trying to drive across Houston, right? Which, in some way, they're paying me for my willingness to wait around all day and then potentially drive across Houston at the end of the day in rush hour traffic to go try to pick up a load, to then fight my way back to a truck stop where I'm going to have to pay for parking, unless I'm just willing to try to park wherever on the side of the road or whatever, the metaphorical sleeping in a ditch, which I don't even necessarily mind, except for the part where the cops could come by at any time and make me move, or just write me a ticket if they're really just, but either way. So my preference, even if I have to pay, is to always make it to the truck stop when possible. And in fact, you know, I'll probably wait for daylight, but I'm probably about to drive my happy ass from one truck stop to another truck stop. And, hopefully there's a spot, because we're close enough to Houston. And this Love's, man, I don't like Love's because Love's is so popular that that's where everybody goes, and they tend to all go at the same time. So, I didn't have to wait that long to fuel when I got here, but just to leave the fuel island and go around the corner and back into a spot. And there was a double spot, or actually it was somebody had their tractor in one of this is effectively a double spot. But even then, I don't know if it's security driving around. There's just some guy driving around in a pickup truck. I don't know what they're doing. And so he's in the way, and which is fine. But you know, just even getting backed in is sort of, I got to fight. And then people who are working, you know, they're trying to leave the fuel island, so they're having to wait on me to back in, and then people are coming in the other way to get to the fuel island, and then I prefer to avoid all that when possible. But again, to maintain a state of readiness, not know, because if I knew I was doing a 34, I would have went to a different truck stop and probably not dealt with any of that. I would have got fuel here, left, and gone to a different truck stop, which is fine, except, you know, it does affect my quality of life. But if they want to pay me, I mean, that's even better, right? In the past, I used to do all of this and not get paid. But then it would be like, hey, I might have beef with the company. It's like, what are y'all doing, right? It's like, y'all need to tell me what we're doing. Now it's like, well, we're paying you to fuck off, kind of. It's like they're sort of paying me to fuck off. It's like, hey, man, fuck off. Here's some money. Now, fuck off. Okay. Again, not a black person, but, you know, Benton as nigger. Hey, N-word, how about you fuck off? All right. I'll live in your truck and take your money. And I'll drive it wherever you tell me to, for the most part. Under the circumstances that they tell me to do it under, right? As much as I'm able to. Oh, I know I'm originating. Yeah, no, I got that bulk hungry. I was talking about the layers of phoniness. No, I'm well aware of my innovations in the space. You know, I go back to, again, just looking at Landry's channel, and I don't mean him specifically. I mean the community at large. You know, there's been lots of innovation for me, but to what end? Again, you know, I'll say something I've been saying on this channel for a long time. None of it's going to amount to a hill of beans. This is all for entertainment purposes only, as far as I'm concerned. You know, and then me working out whatever I need to work out. You know, that's what it's about from my perspective. And then if other people want to take something from it, they're more than welcome. And, you know, again, I can sit here and do all of this by myself to no one, but, you know, might as well broadcast it, right? And sometimes it's content, sometimes it's not. And yeah, people have donated. I mean, there's been generous donations. In fact, I'm going to be paying back Bulk Hungry, who did me a solid and loaned me some money that I needed. And it turned out that I could have floated it, but it's worth it to me because it at least gave me the flexibility. You know, what if I didn't get the first week's paycheck? It's like, yeah, I could float it as long as they pay me. What if they don't pay me? Right. It's like, well, yeah, but they're probably going to pay you. Yeah, but they might not. You never know. It's possible. You know, people get hired by trucking companies right before the trucking company can no longer make payroll. Like, it's not that that's just impossible. Yeah, it's unlikely. But, you know, a trucking company that's about to not make payroll for the first time, they probably hired at least one new driver that week. You know, they're never not hiring. And they can talk about, you know, they can lie to me or bullshit me and try to tell me that, oh, we're like family, and it's, you know, they can pretend like they don't have high turnover. Yeah, they do. There's not one company who does this form of trucking that doesn't have extremely high turnover. It's not possible. It doesn't exist, right? Especially not one who will hire me right off the street. You know, some private fleet somewhere, you know, that has their own fucking freight. That's completely different. They don't hire people off the street. You know, not generally anyway. And not on a 1099. The fact that they're paying me on a 1099 is really all you need to know on some level. You know, these are people who are already willing to do things, you know, beyond what is to strictly adhere to the letter of the law. If that makes sense. What am I looking for? Where's my spoon? Oh, there they go. Spoon and my fork. And then, you know, the thing is about talking about me or my personality, you know, from my own perspective, that becomes less and less important over time because it's not real. Meaning it belongs to this world of death and this game of lies. Like, there is no Benton with respect to what I am. You know, the core essence. There is no Benton. There is no human psychology, right? There is no delusion. There is no illusion, right? This is all, it's only even experienced, you know, as a projection through the subversion of that creative force that never lies dormant and is always expanding and, you know, bringing something into existence. And contained within that is antithesis, which is, you know, antithesis must always be seeking to disprove the authority and validity of thesis. There has to be that interplay. There has to be. And that's just how it is. Nobody can do anything about it. Right. So it is like the Truman Show, or it is like a movie in that, you know, this idea of main character syndrome or whatever. It's like, well, everybody's the main character from their perspective, whether they know it or not. But then, you know, the fourth wall and all of these things, you know, what happens when the individual comes into that true knowledge of self is to realize that, well, this is a slow process of death. This is not, it's not even life in the first place. You know, this earth, this world, these systems, employment, corporations, government, none of it even has the potential to express creatively and in a truly living way. It's the lack of those characteristics dressed up to seem very real, you know, and that is when we get back to talking about strength of delusion, right? Ultimately, it doesn't really matter that they've, you know, that I'm even working as a truck driver, that I have money to spend, that, you know, Benton's main goal today is to get parked at a different truck stop to then be able to hopefully drop the trailer and bobtail to Walmart, which is that's almost a guarantee, but then possibly Whole Foods, which will be a little bit, you know, I'm going to have to feel out, you know, will they let me drop my trailer? Or I can just, you know, pay for parking and drop the trailer in the reserve spot and tape the fucking, you know, tape the receipt to the outside of the trailer, which is probably what I'll do. Even then, you know, what if somebody steals it? Right? This is near enough to Houston, Texas, right? And, you know, that could happen anywhere. You know, it's like I wouldn't want to now. So what, I got to explain to the police that I didn't tip somebody off to come steal the trailer? Like, well, you did a live stream about it, buddy. I mean, well, yeah, fair enough. I guess I shouldn't have. Perhaps I could have chosen to say, well, I'm, you know, either way, somebody who might want to steal an empty trailer would understand that if they're motivated, they can probably, if they have access to a tractor, they can probably cruise around all the local truck stops and find a fucking trailer to steal. I don't think that would be that hard. They wouldn't have to need to wait for me, right, to leave one somewhere. And then, you know, the business is probably a write-off anyway, right? Like who even knows? But yeah, it would be an inconvenience in the short term, clearly. It just would be a hassle that I wouldn't want to deal with. And then, you know, again, the chances are that none of that would happen. But, that's probably what's going to happen. But then, of course, now it's like, do I really want to go drive around unnecessarily in the rush hour morning traffic of Houston? It's like, well, not really. But if I get to go to Whole Foods and stock up on dark chocolate, right, and prunes, oh my God, prunes, man, I need some prunes. Don't need them, but it'd be nice. It would be nice. And the Walmart prunes, those aren't prunes as far as what I use prunes for. So we're not buying any more of those. Nope. No mas. No mas prunes. The end result is always the same. Yeah, I mean, it's it's interesting. Yeah, some things, yeah, those are a lot of subtle points. Again, and this is not a critique of the commenter or the comment, it's just what I see in the more broadly speaking in the so-called truth community is until the person can and will be extremely specific about the ideas that are conveyed, there's a little bit too much left to the imagination. So I think I know what you mean, bulk hungry, but do I? Do I really know what you mean? I suspect I do. But does the audience? Or do they care? What are they here for? Right. But yeah, futility, just futility as a concept, to realize on some level that all these efforts are futile by definition, and that's okay. But anyway, I'll be right back. Quick break. Quick. And the battery's going to die fairly soon, so I guess I'll just ride out just wait till the phone shuts down, I guess. And then by then it'll be time for me to make my strategy on where I'm going. And this another thing, I have to start this big rig at some point because if I try to go all day long without running the engine, then the fucking tractor's not going to start. So, and I hate firing these things up and just letting them idle long enough to reach normal operating temperature. So really, I need to go drive it somewhere. But then, if I do that now, will I get to the other truck stop and all the spots are still full? I don't know. I think this lot's still basically full. Or did this guy next to me leave? Yeah, see, I'm pretty sure nobody's left this bitch yet. I'm gonna look out the front real quick. Oh, I can't. That's right. We got shades in the way. Yeah, I see one truck pulling out, but let me see. Is somebody already in position to pull right in? Is the question. I'm gonna watch and see when he leaves. What happens? Unless they're blindsided, I don't see anybody. So. Oh man. Well, then what I was just thinking about is, at a certain point, I'm observing that just to keep the stream going, it's like me interacting with my own personality, right? It's like that becomes a drain at a certain point. And then, a lot of these live streamers or people, and I've done this to some extent, to even become somewhat dependent on donations. It's like, at a certain point, it's because people want to observe other people, and I'm like this too. Observing somebody else interacting with their own psychology and personality, right? And then that sort of becomes a drain at a certain point. I think I'm dehydrated. I think that's what's going on here. quite, but we're getting there. That reminds me, it's almost time to go get the water out of the side box and fill up these water jugs. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Later on. Well, yeah. A hill of beans is not without value, right? But again, futility, I think, is the futility versus utility. Probably, what is the utility of such a thing? Well, it's a cope, but again, everything. What's not? Everything's a cope on some level. But yeah, I guess I'm gonna get out of here too because the battery's gonna die anyway. We're down to 9%.